Okay, welcome dear students. So let us start our lecture for today on disaster management. So in the previous lecture we discussed about some health issues and how to provide the response system for health issues as well as post disaster rehabilitation and at that time how the psychological needs develop for the victims. So let us continue our today's lecture from the same topic. Let us start our discussion on disaster mitigation. So some of the components are that permanent reduction of risk of a disaster to limit impact on human suffering and economic assets. So as discussed earlier, the mitigation aspects relate to how a particular disaster which is known to happen and which is expected to happen in the near future, how the risks for that particular disaster can be reduced. So it involves primary mitigation, that is reducing the hazard and vulnerability. So I have discussed about the various vulnerable aspects of the particular societies or that particular location, how those vulnerable areas or vulnerable people can be firstly made aware about the oncoming disaster, or how these particular sections can be noted in our files so that effective measures can be implemented in these particular areas. Then reducing hazard. Then first of all, for example, let us take a scenario of earthquake. So if we know that, let us say in Ajmer city, that it is in the zone 5 of earthquake zone for India. So zone 5 is treated as the most vulnerable zone or most hazardous zone in terms of earthquake. So we should instruct the various public works department as well as the people of Ajmer city to prepare themselves, to prepare the structures in such a way, to prepare the roads, highways, and various other buildings and other things in such a way that in case of an earthquake, the hazard and vulnerability is considerably reduced. Next, we have secondary mitigation, which involves reducing the effects of hazard. So again, continuing the same example. So effects of hazard, it involves like in earthquake, what are the various possibilities? The buildings might develop cracks, the buildings might fail structurally, then people might not find open spaces to run. The evacuation system from public buildings, if it is difficult, then it should be made much more accessible. For example, in case of cinema theaters, if people are not evacuate the building within time, then it might be disastrous for them. Next, we have some components, that is reducing hazard. It involves protection against threat by removing the cause of the threat. So, in the example of earthquake, the cause of threat, it cannot be removed, but the protection against the threat, it can be enhanced. So, if we are able to make our structural integrity even further enriched, and if our buildings are able to take even higher earthquake loads, in civil engineering we term it as seismic loads or earthquake loads. So let me write you the spelling. So these are nothing but seismic or earthquake loads. So we calculate it separately. They depend upon, let us say this is a particular structure, a high rise building containing of multiple floors. So this is your ground level, let us say. So what happens, these earthquake waves, as we have learned in the concept of geography previously, that these earthquake waves move in the form of waves. Okay, the waves might be having higher amplitude and frequency, or might be having lower. It depends upon the type of wave. And there are some peculiarly different type of waves such as P wave, R wave, L wave, S wave. Okay, so depending upon the wave and the pattern, we analyze that how it will affect the various structures. So we define and try to calculate what will be the seismic load or earthquake load developing on these structures. And generally, in the 99% cases, these loads develop laterally along the ground surface. That means that this is the only possible scenario. It can't be, earthquake load can't develop in vertical scenario. So we need to make our structures much more structurally integrated, and the load carrying capacity should be increased if we know that we are in the high vulnerability zone. Then next we have reducing the vulnerability, so reducing the effect of threat. So here we are talking about effect of threat. Here we were causing about cause of threat. So cause of threat, in some cases it can't be removed. So for example, it can be removed in cases of let us say fire. So in case of fire, if we know that this is a hazardous place, so we can definitely take even higher precautions. Let us say if we can use the better quality of electrical wiring system, we can provide fire extinguisher directly at the place if the hazardous processes are going on there in that particular industry. Next we have reducing vulnerability, so reducing the effect. Effect includes, so for example, if fire or earthquake has taken place, they will be having some consequences or effects. So how these effects of that particular threat can be reduced. So as I mentioned earlier that earthquakes, although they can't be stopped completely, but their vulnerability can be reduced at a very higher extent using our engineering which we have learned so far. So you can take this statement that natural hazards are, although inevitable, but we can reduce the vulnerability of these disasters. And for the man-made disasters, we can definitely even reduce the occurrence of such disasters, and also we can reduce the vulnerability of such disasters. Next, we have components of disaster mitigation. So it includes hazard identification and mapping, which has the assessment of estimating probability of a damaging phenomena of given magnitude in given area. So as I have discussed about this recently in the last slide, I have discussed about earthquake. So how we can reduce the, or how we can make our structures better. So first of all, we need to identify the zones in which the possibility is even higher for a particular disaster. Then it includes the assessment. So even as of now, we can do various studies which involve assessment of the major buildings which are very old. So those are the most vulnerable places. So assessing these buildings has a criteria in itself, and if the assessment has been done, so we can estimate the probability of how much damage it can handle, what will be the risk taking capacities. So considerations involve the history of the building, probability of various intensities. So for example, if we talk about floods, so probability and history that floods might occur in the city of Ajmer, it is considerably low because we are altitude wise at a higher location, and most of our places are here are having some or other altitude, and water gets flown away quite easily, and not much of a threat comes up because we don't even have some perennial rivers which might increase the levels or so. Then probability of various intensity, so we can find out probability. So as I mentioned, flood probability is low. uh, Maybe earthquake probability might we might assess. Next, other like terrorist activities we should be able to assess. Then other man-made factors like any type of chemical industries or hazardous industries that are going on. So those assessments should be done from time to time, and government of India has provided various standards and norms which are helpful for us engineers to assess the hazardous and assess the risk taking capacities for various structures. So myself, I have been a student of the course for earthquake engineering, and recently, as I mentioned even in the previous slides also, I believe that I attended one of the courses on disaster mitigation for earthquake specifically. So various types of methods and various type of engineering methods were discussed there by various experts. There we learnt about the civil engineering aspects of earthquake disaster mitigation and how as a civil engineer we can improve the conditions. Next, we need to find out the possibilities of maximum threat, that what is the maximum magnitude that can happen for that particular disaster. So for example, now corona is spreading at a good pace. So we should be able to assess that what is the maximum threat that it can be for our nation. So various studies were done by the mathematician, by the economist, if you have been following news. So they assessed and they predicted based upon some models and research that what will be the maximum probability, that maximum how much people might get affected. Next, we have possible secondary hazards. So, secondary hazards include the hazards related to them, and we should definitely consider them. So, for example, if earthquake occurs and simultaneously the buildings might fall, and let us say if there is a building of, let us say there is a nuclear power plant or there is a hazardous chemical industry. So, in that case, the possibility of these secondary hazards happening simultaneously increases even further. We have a considerable amount of research and history with regards to it. So, for example, in the uh, country of Japan and recently this Chernobyl area, so they experienced some little tremors, and due to which even the nuclear and the radioactive spread was observed, which took many lives there. Next, we have the vulnerability analysis. So, what it is? It is a process which results in an understanding of the types and levels of exposure of persons, property, and the environment to the effects of identified hazards at a particular time. So, this is all about vulnerability analysis. So, we need to understand what are the various types, what are the various levels of exposures of that particular disaster for persons, property, and also the environmental effects of that particular disasters. And we need to identify them for all particular disasters with high probability, and even having the history for that particular area. And from time to time we need to do these vulnerability analysis. So for examples, we can for earthquake we can definitely do some studies on the existing structures for, let us say, span of 10 years each. So through with that we can assess, we can prepare a database, so that will be helpful for the authorities to administer the situation in case of earthquake, and also as a mitigation procedure, while providing them guidelines to the owners of those buildings to how they can enhance the structural integrity of that particular building. Next, we have a component, risk analysis. So vulnerability analysis and risk analysis are different. So risk analysis involves determining nature and scale of losses, so which can be anticipated in a particular area. It involves analysis of probability of hazard of a particular magnitude. Next, we have elements susceptible to potential loss and damage. Next, we need to analyze the nature of the vulnerability. The specified future time period also need to be assessed. Next, what are the preventive measures? That is, activities taken to prevent a natural phenomena or potential hazard from having harmful effects on either people or economic assets. So these are some of the aspects of disaster mitigation. We need to remember the what are the various components and what are the difference between them. So for example, don't get confused between risk analysis and vulnerability analysis. So if a question comes, we should be able to explain all these components. Always take relevant examples from the latest news that you might have seen. So as a student of disaster management, we should follow the various news. So for example, I would suggest that currently there is a scenario of floods happening in the state of Bihar, and particularly in the eastern section of India. So what I expect from all of you, that you cover the news, what is happening, how the government is trying to manage those particular disasters, what are the various measures taken by them. So it will be not only helpful in all covering all these topics, but if a question comes up for case studies, as it is also mentioned in your syllabus, so you can expect some particular case studies that examiner might ask in your exam. So once we are gone through the news, so you will be definitely ahead of all those students who haven't been following the news of the various disasters that can be happening. Also, it becomes important that you cover the news of corona also. So how the government did some work on how it prevented the rapid increase. As we know that due to the efforts of government of India only, that now that COVID-19 spread has been controlled to a significant extent. If the lockdown and other measures would have not been taken place, then the this disaster would have been uncontrollable, and we would not be in a position to provide even hospitals for the patients. So, considering that our country is having a population which is well known to the world, so we are the second highest populated area, and any spread of such diseases might be catastrophic for our massive fraction of population. So we need to work upon as a student, and in the last lecture also I emphasized that as a student of disaster management, we should be able to sit on the various seats, the seats of the victims, the seats of the administrators, the policing authorities, and also the disaster management authorities, how they manage, and also the relief forces and how they are actually working in the field to tackle the current situation. Okay, so let us move ahead. So some of the disaster mitigation measures I have classified into active and passive measures. So active measures include promotion of desired actions by planning control, training and education, economics, assistance, subsidies, providing facilities such as refugee points and storage for them. And then we have public information systems. So these points I have discussed here and there in brief. So I expect all of you from all of you that you will be able to explain these various things. Next, we have passive measures, which include requirement to conform with design codes, checking compliance of controls on site, court proceedings, fine closures, control land use, denial of utilities in areas, development in undesired development. So, what is the basic difference that you can see between active measures and passive measures? So, you might be able to observe here that active measures mainly take the public, the common public, as the partner in developing the disaster mitigation measures. Whereas in the passive measures, it is the government, it is the DMAs, that is the disaster management authorities, may it be national or state, and also the various authorities which are related to it. For example, court bodies, the administrative bodies which relate to fines, the land use land authorities. Then we have PWDs and also various civil engineering bodies which must be a part of the providing passive measures for that particular area. Next, we have vulnerability profile of India. So it involves various types of disasters. So floods take about 12% vulnerability. Earthquakes have 58%. As you can see, it is the highest. Then we have drought. The picture is not clear. I'm sorry for that. And 16% is the value vulnerability risk for that. Next, we have ocean or water developed vulnerabilities such as tsunamis or high tides or uncontrollable, even higher energy waves. So it is around 8%. Next, we have landslides and other type of problems that might occur, like failure of some retaining walls, failure of some retaining structures, and this failure of slopes of these particular soils. So how it can affect the nearby population. So pause this slide and read about the major disasters that have occurred in India over the last 40 years. So the data can show you that what are the high vulnerable zones, and this is also a history study as a student of disaster management and mitigation. So first in 1972, large part of country with 200 million people getting affected, we faced a major drought. Then in 77, in the state of Andhra Pradesh, a lot of people and around 40,000 cattle also died in the event of cyclone. Then we have earthquakes in 93. As you can see, Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, these are the coastal zones and they have been worstly affected by the cyclones. And the inland areas such as Latur of Maharashtra, Bhuj earthquake, and such things occur mainly in inland. So probability of cyclones hitting a non-coastal area is a little difficult and having low probability, whereas cyclones affecting the coastal areas have a considerable high probability. So next we have just after 2001 Bhuj earthquake. In 2004 we faced tsunami, and the worst affected areas were the coastline of Tamil Nadu, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, and Andaman and Nicobar Islands, and the UT of Puducherry. So a lot of people were affected there. Then in just after the next year in the Maharashtra we faced one of the worst floods. See the amount of deaths that have occurred in this flood. So around 1100 people lost their life. In the case of tsunami, roughly around 11,000 people lost their life. Then 2008, this Kashmir earthquake, then Kosi floods. So this is one of the reoccurring scenario. Right now also one of the rivers named Gandak has overflown and it has been providing disaster and created flood situation in the state of Bihar. The Kosi river also flows in the state of Bihar only, and it will be even better if we can draw the geographical locations of these rivers and what main river it gets mixed with. So, for example, Kosi, Gandak, and all they are mainly the tributary rivers of the river Ganga. So, we can draw diagram in case a question comes to discuss the case study of flood situations in the eastern India. Then again you can see cyclone occurred in the coastal line of Tamil Nadu and around 200 people died. So then the most recent disastrous one was the Uttarakhand Kedarnath flash flood. So in that you can see around 6,000 people, that is 5,700 people were dead and 70,000 were affected. Next in the same year, Falin cyclone. So again, you might be confused that so far cyclones were not having any prefix, and now suddenly we are having Falin and all that, and even now the cyclones are named. So generally cyclones are predicted well in advance by the meteorological department. So what happens, there is a different conventions which are followed by the particular group of countries and also particular authorities. I will not go much in detail for them, but just for information, these names are decided by those authorities and by those group of countries based upon some history, and the countries name these cyclones so that it can be easily circulated amongst the people, and also it it has some other advantages also. So Falin cyclone was observed in the coastline of Odisha. Although many people didn't die, and this is because the evacuation procedure was significant. Around 10 lakh people were evacuated well in advance, since we were knowing that such a cyclone might be developing. Next, this is the map which shows the various disasters that have occurred in the recent years, or maybe let us say last 2 decades. So we can see here the entire India has been covered with some of the other disasters, and these dots represent the various things, various locations which are vulnerable and which faced huge disasters. So next we have developments in disaster management. So this is about the ministerial role. In the year 99, August of 1999, a high-powered committee was set up by Government of India, and in until 2001, responsibility was with Agricultural Ministry. Okay. Next, it was transferred to Ministry of Home Affairs in the year June 2002. Then we have the development and establishment of National Disaster Management Authority, that is NDMA. It was established in the year 2005. So this is very important slide. You all should take note of it. Next, we have inclusion of disaster management in the 7th schedule of the Constitution. So once these particular things are added in the Constitution, I will not be discussing about 7th schedule specifically because it will contain a separate lecture, that we have a number of schedules and what each schedule contains and how 7th schedule has been helpful. Although it is much more important that once it is a part of one of the schedules in the Constitution, so it even bears much more responsibility on the government, and it means that the government is much more worried about managing these disasters. So later in the year 2005 December, a Disaster Management Act was passed, which included various aspects. We will be covering them later. Next, we have changes in disaster management in India. So response centric to an integrated approach. So this was the paradigm shift in the changes in the DMA for India. Next, this was backed by institutional framework, that is legal authority. As you can see, once a bill, it is converted to a particular act. For example, this act was passed in 2005. So it develops the legal authority and institutional framework for that particular entity. Next, holistic to integrated approach. It means that development of NDMA and bringing it up directly under to the Ministry of Home Affairs. It has developed an integrated approach. So this was the paradigm shift which we observed in the year 2005. Next, as it is directly now in the MHA, that is Ministry of Home Affairs, so separate funds were created, financial mechanisms were developed, and as it was included in 7 schedules, the President of India has supported it by financial mechanisms and by creation of separate funds. Next, we have institutional framework. So it includes NDMA, that is National Disaster Management Authority, as its apex body, and Prime Minister is the chairperson for this body. Next, we have National Executive Committee, that has secretaries of 14 ministries and chief of integrated defense staff. So now we can see the integration of various ministries which are working combinedly for the National Executive Committee, that is under the disaster management structure. Next, at the central level, we have central ministries co-aligned with NDMA, and then we have NIDM. This is the National Institute of Disaster Management, in which various studies are taken place. Scientists are working here. Next, we have NDRF, that is the National Disaster Response Force, which include people of forces which actually work in the field and provide the relief measures and response to all these disasters. Next, under state level, we have SDMAs similar to NDMA. It is headed by the Chief Minister. Next, we have state executive committees. It also involves multiple secretaries from multiple ministries, and they work combinedly. Next, even at the district level, we have DDMAs, and it is headed by the district magistrates, and it is an interface between government and public. So as of now, also in the case of Corona, also you might have seen that various district magistrates and collectors were working day and night, and they were working as the interface between the government regulations and how they are implemented to the public. So these are some of the nodal ministries for different type of disasters. For example, man-made and natural disasters including flood, tsunami, cyclone and earthquake directly come under Home Affairs. Next, we have drought, which come under agriculture. Biological and epidemics, they come under health and family welfare. So next we have chemical and forest related, so it come under environment and forest. Nuclear comes under Department of Atomic Energy. Air accidents come under Department of Civil Aviation. Railway accidents under Railway, and industrial accidents under the Labor Ministry. So mitigation projects. So World Bank has been assisting various projects for cyclones. Around 300 million US dollars were given by World Bank. For earthquakes, government has allotted around 1600 crores. So a pilot project for school safety is also running for 48 crore rupees. Then we have disaster information and communication network. So another significant amount has been given. Although also projects are being implemented for landslides, floods, medical preparedness, and creation of National Disaster Response Reserves. So these are various aspects of mitigation projects by the government of India and the various state governments, how it is working. Some of the disaster management programs that are in development involves that all new projects programs will mandatorily have inbuilt disaster resilience. So it is under conceptualization level. Next we have Planning Commission and the Ministry of Finance to give approval to these projects only if disaster resilience self-certification is provided. So now you have seen that this certification procedure has become much more of significance, and government and various bodies are now much more concerned that the infrastructural projects or the various projects development programs, they also cover the various measures that are needed to be taken as part of disaster management and control. Next we have ongoing projects to be revisited to include the disaster resilience audit. So the ongoing projects are again reconsidered, and the disaster resilience measures, whether they have implemented in them, and if not, further funds are released so that they can incorporate the disaster management features into them. And audits are conducted. Audits are basically checks that are conducted from time to time. Then we have infrastructural loans to be sanctioned by the banks only after due diligence on disaster resilience audit. So until unless these resilience audits are not conducted by those project contractors, so till then infrastructural loans are not sanctioned by the banks. So this has become one of the norms for the infrastructural projects. Then we have existing lifeline projects to be selectively revisited and retrofitted. So that is I have discussed. And then we have generation of awareness by introduction of disaster management in education. So we are also working under this same topic. So we are basically generating awareness. We are learning various aspects of disaster management directly from the school time to even the final year level of BTech. Then we need to read about documentation of India disaster report. We will be covering it later. And then training at community levels and local levels by the PRIs and the local self-government members, Panchayati Raj institutes and local self-government members. Okay, so even at the villages we need to provide the training. So these are some of the training that have been framed and institutionalized by the NIDM and Government of India. So it can be seen on the website, and the comprehensive 6-week course is also available for a fee of rupees 1500. Then we have thematic courses and different type of courses which involve these things. So if you are interested, you can visit this site and get a look on it. Next, these are further some trainings. These are available at NIDM website. We can also further read these based upon our syllabus. If any of the topics are coinciding with the syllabus, I request all of you that you try to access this site and try to take notes based upon the syllabus. Since we don't have previous year papers, we don't know what type of questions might be coming. So just don't memorize or ratify each and everything. Just take a basic look. Take 2 to 3 readings or maybe 4 to 5 readings on these particular topics, so that you get the crisp point data, and it will be automatically saved in your brains, and it will you can recollect them during the exams and provide the answers with regards to them. So it includes the various guides for civil defense volunteers, public health workers. So basically guides for school safety and other various disasters are provided in this. I will try to fetch as much data as possible, and I will share in the Google Classroom. So that's all for this lecture. In the next lecture, we will be starting with the topic on response and rescue systems. So, thank you for being here. And if there are any doubts or problems, you may put it in the comments or in the Google Classroom as well. So, thank you for watching, and see you in the next one with response and response and rescue methods. So, thank you.